Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. In northern British Columbia, the province's Supreme Court has issued an interim injunction ordering a barricade on a bridge over the Morris River to be taken down. The barricade was put up by members of the Unistoten camp, Warner Niziel and his partner Frida Hewson. The camp was built a decade ago as a homestead and grew to be a land-based healing center, but it was built strategically on the route of a proposed $40 billion pipeline owned by the Coastal GasLink Company, a subsidiary of the TransCanada Pipelines. This proposed 670-kilometer pipeline will move liquid natural gas from northern Alberta to Kitimat, BC. 20 First Nations along the route have approved the pipeline. CGL filed for an injunction against Niziel and Hewson last week. It was granted on Friday, giving the couple until 4 p.m. Pacific time today to take down the barricade. We have a team on the ground at the Unistoten camp, and we'll have more for you in the coming days. The former Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador is testifying today at an inquiry into the Muskrat Falls Hydro Project. Kathy Dunderdale told the inquiry she believed all risks were covered in the project's $6.2 billion capital cost estimate.
I knew about the 7% and the 6.2, and I knew there was no particular amount of money designated outside of that.
Dunderdale was Premier when the massive hydroelectric development was granted final approval in 2012. The cost of Labrador Dam has more than doubled to $12.7 billion. Officials from nearly 200 countries have brokered a new UN climate agreement, but it wasn't without challenges.
It is not easy to find agreement on a deal so specific and so technical. But in these circumstances, every single step forward is a big achievement. And through this package, you have made 1,000 little steps forward together. You can feel proud.
The agreement enables countries to put into action the principles in the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. The 156-page rulebook details how countries will now report and monitor their emission cuts. Still, environmental activists have expressed frustration. The new agreement doesn't include specific reductions of greenhouse gas emissions and curbing global warming by 2030. Political divisions clouded the marathon talks with the U.S. and several oil-producing countries, showing an unwillingness to take tough action on the environment. The federal government has been promising for years to end long-term First Nation boil water advisories, but the Shamattawa First Nation says it's plagued with one short-term boil water advisory after another. The isolated Cree community of 1,600 members is located about 750 kilometers north of Winnipeg. They have been under a boil water advisory since December 12th. As of right now, Chief Eric Redhead is unsure when the advisory will be lifted and says since 2016, there's been so many water advisories, his community has lost count.
I think there's only one way to resolve the boil water advisories in Shamattawa, and that's to build a brand new facility. I'm confident that the federal government will do that and do the right thing and build a brand new facility.
Members of 8 Metis settlements from Alberta are celebrating today in Ottawa. As Annette Francis reports, they joined the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations and put pen to paper in a historic ceremony.
I am lifting this pen in honor and respect for our past leaders.
And with that, a Métis framework agreement between the Metis Settlements General Council and the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations is signed. Carolyn Bennett says it sets a path forward in reconciliation and in recognition of rights.
We will work with the province that's been, I think, very clearly committed to your well-being, and that this is good that we get to work together and figure out how we deal with your Section 35 rights, deal with the articles in the UN Declaration, deal with all of these things around justice.
The agreement was co-developed with members of the Metis Settlements General Council, which represents 8 Metis settlements in Alberta. Cunningham says it took less than 2 years to develop the framework. He's pleased with today's agreement.
One of the first things that we want to do, we talked about our priorities. Our membership have identified as health as being one of the main priorities, health, infrastructure, and moving towards getting our lands entrenched in the Canadian Constitution. So those are some of the immediate things we'd like to start working on.
The council is not affiliated or represented by the Metis National Council, and to date they have had little interaction with the federal government. It's been a long time coming, says council member Art Tompkins from the Gift Lake Metis Settlement.
It'll be nice to be federal. It'll be very nice. Maybe we can, start looking after our people. Not just funding, we always talk about funding. Yeah, of course we need funding. But just to be recognized that we're somebody. Just to be a somebody, not just a forgotten people.
According to Cunningham, the council will get back to the table to work on the next steps early in the new year. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
We need to take a quick break, but coming up later in the show, an out-of-this-world story. Here's a peek.
Engines have started and liftoff.
I'm Tom Fenario, and this is the rocket that brought Canadian astronaut David St. Jacques to the International Space Station. He's only just begun his 6.5-month mission in space, and one of the items he chose to bring with him is the work of an Inuk designer.
David wanted to bring something that was meaningful to Inuit because he was a doctor up north. So I think he feels that he has a connection.
Find out what St. Jacques brought up into orbit later on APTN National News.
On the East Coast, we've got zeros for Charlottetown and Halifax and rain. Happy Valley Goose Bay is rain and -5. Nain is -6. Saguenay, -1, Sept-Îles, -4, Gasp, -3. Lots of sunshine in southern Ontario, 5s for Sarnia, London, Windsor. Big Lake, sunny and 1, Wawa and Elliott Lake, sunny, -3 and 3. Puckatawagan's -10, -3s for the Paw, Norway, House and God's Lake. Zeros for Barons River, Princess Harbour, Gimli, sunshine in those communities, 2s for Brandon and Dauphin. 3 in Yorkton and Saskatoon, 6 in Swift Current, 5s for Estevan and Regina, sunshine down south. -10s for Stony Rapids and Uranium City with a mix of sun and cloud, -2 in La Ronge. Welcome back. A 22-year-old man has been arrested and charged with second-degree murder in the death of Braden Jacob. The arrest was announced by Thunder Bay Police late in the day on Friday. It capped off a week of devastating reports on the city's police board and police service. As Dennis Ward reports, the board has now been dismantled and the Thunder Bay Police Association is firing back.
The Thunder Bay Police Association is taking issue with a bombshell review by a police watchdog that says systemic racism exists within the police service. The association represents more than 300 city police service members. They broke their silence on the reports on Sunday. While the association takes the reports seriously, its president says, quote, "We feel that the OIPRD report does not highlight the hard work of the TBPA members that is done on a daily basis within the community of Thunder Bay, nor does it mention the high solve rate for violent crime in the city. We are not perfect and we accept the responsibility for those mistakes. What we do not accept is the repeated accusations that our members are racist." The Police Association calls on city, federal, and provincial politicians to provide more funding and manpower for the service. The release also calls on, quote, Mr. Fiddler, presumably Anishinaabe Nation Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler, to work with police and the city rather than, quote, direct blame toward the police. The Police Association's response comes 2 days after an arrest was announced in the death of 17-year-old Braden Jacob. 22-year-old Jonathan Yellowhead has been charged with second-degree murder. Friday also saw the Thunder Bay Police Services Board dismantled. Senator Murray Sinclair released the findings of a damning investigation declaring, quote, the board's repeated failures to address the concerns of the Indigenous community constitute an emergency. On Monday, the city's mayor, Bill Morrow, whose brother is a member of the city's police service, raised concerns about Senator Sinclair's dismissal of the new police board, saying elected officials, himself included, have been pushed to the sidelines, ignoring the voters of Thunder Bay. Dennis Ward, APTN National News.
In February 2017, someone went into a home in rural Manitoba and killed 2 men who lived there. It happened in St. George, about an hour north of Winnipeg. Now police have charged a former Saugeen First Nation school principal with murder. We have this story from CTV.
Nearly 2 years ago, 2 men were found dead in this home in the tiny community of St. George near Powerview Pine Falls. Their neighbor, Jamie McMullen, says a woman showed up at his door around 2 in the morning on February 28th, asking for his help at the house next door.
And I walked in and I found him on the floor. I believe Steve was dead. And Jody, I don't know if he was still alive, but I immediately started doing CPR on him.
The RCMP determined the victims, who've been identified as Jody Brown and Stephen Chevrolet, both died from a homicide. On Wednesday, the Mounties announced 54-year-old Claude Guimond of Fort Alexander had been arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in connection to the deaths. He worked as principal at Saugeen High School.
I'm sure a lot of people are shocked.
Arnie Honky lives in Pine Falls and says he knows Guimond through the hockey community. Honky used to work at the town's arena, and he said Guimond is heavily involved in the sport. Reached by phone, Saugeen First Nation Chief Derek Henderson says it's been a tough day. Henderson says Guimond has been on leave supporting a family member who was ill, but Henderson declined to comment any further. Guimond spoke to CTV News in April 2017 on an unrelated matter, in his role as principal less than 2 months after the homicides. The RCMP says it notified Saugeen First Nation leadership when Guimond was placed under arrest.
It's a small community, and it happened in our community, and things like this don't happen in small communities.
McMullen says news of the arrest will be difficult for those who know Guimond, but could bring some relief to others in the community.
It's really sad in this way for me, because I knew them and I was over there. In fact, that night, Jody had phoned me and asked me to come over, but I didn't go over. I was sleeping.
The RCMP hasn't released any other information about the homicides. Josh Crabb, CTV News, St. George.
There have been many stories of tragedies from the child welfare system coming out of the Northwest Territories in recent months, but now one young woman wants to change the narrative and is transforming her experience in care into real change. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs explains.
March 2000 would have been 11 still.
Sandra Noel is unearthing her past.
It's in my grade 11. I had red hair.
She is collecting NWT social services records from her decades spent in foster care.
What goes through my mind? I'm like anxious to get them and read them. So I just go pick them up. And
Noel was adopted at birth, but at age 10, she went into foster care, taken from her home of Inuvik and brought to Yellowknife.
Main questions were about my dad passing, like his passing, my birth family, and my social workers were working on a family tree for me and stuff. I haven't seen that in my records yet.
It's been over a year now since she first requested her child welfare file. She's finding it a tedious and long process.
Online it said that I would have had to pay to get my records, but then from there I went to social services office downtown, and they referred me to somewhere else.
But it hasn't come easy. Full pages have been redacted.
I guess in my mind I was expecting like the deep dark stuff, but it wasn't. The first file I picked up was like more of the social workers, I don't even know how to put it, but it was just like generic stuff and travel letters and whatnot. But
there's a lot of administration stuff, but it is hidden gems like this newspaper article from her file that brings her some contentment. Now Noelle wants to put her strength and experience with the system to good use. She has teamed up with not-for-profit Youth in Care Canada advocating for better services.
If I even help one youth in care or from care, that'll be amazing. And just to help empower myself.
Noelle wasn't surprised by the failing grade the Auditor General gave the NWT Child Welfare this fall, but she will take action.
You feel like unloved and stuff in care, voiceless. I know I have. So to know that there's people out there raising awareness.
Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
In British Columbia, the provincial government has announced some major changes for fish farming, and as APTN's Tina House explains, it's a big step towards the recognition of inherent rights and title of Indigenous nations.
It's taken decades, but finally First Nations in BC were heard, and the message was received by governments and industry that wild salmon must be saved. And that starts with the gradual closing down of open-net fish farms in the Broughton Archipelago.
Enough is enough. That it's time that we insist and demand and pursue justice for the wild salmon in our territories.
Fish farming has been controversial over the years, with scientists and First Nations warning that migrating young salmon were being affected by dangerous viruses from the fish farms. The tensions prompted First Nations leaders to evict the companies from their traditional territory, and when that didn't work, on-the-water blockades were held. Injunctions were granted in the courts to end those blockades, but when the NDP government were elected, new negotiations began.
But at our core, at our focus, we have been focused on wild salmon and the importance to the people of the coast, but more importantly, to Indigenous peoples who have depended on salmon for thousands of years.
And now, thanks to an agreement between First Nations in the area, the BC government and two companies, Marine Harvest and Cermak, any company wanting to establish a fish farm in the near future will have to have final approval by First Nations and meet strict guidelines by Fisheries and Oceans that their farm will not have adverse effects on wild salmon.
And what I kept hearing from you time and time again, and we heard from the province time and time again, is the concern for the people that have employment. And so we had to strike a balance between the needs of our people and the needs of industry, and I believe we have done that expertly.
The plan means that 4 farms will close next year, 2 more in 2020, and 4 more in 2022. The remaining 7 farm tenures will also end after that if they don't have approval by First Nations and license granted by Fisheries and Oceans. Tina House, APTN National News, Victoria.
It's time for another quick break, but we've got more news to come, and here's the rest of tomorrow's weather. In northern Alberta, -8 in Sunshine and High Level, -5 in Sunny and Peace River. 3s for Edmonton, Red Deer, sunshine in those communities, 11 for Lethbridge. 10 in rain in Vancouver and Victoria, 8 in rain in Campbell River. Dease Lake is sunny and -6, 2 in Smithers and sunshine. -21 in Clear in Dawson City and -6 in sunny in Whitehorse. -21 in Norman Wells, -19 in Fort Simpson. Tuck is clear and -17. Inuvik is -19 and clear. -27 in clear in Cambridge Bay, -26 in clear in Repulse Bay, -10 in Pangertown, -11 and snow in Iqaluit. Welcome back. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to appreciate the unique fashion designs of the Inuit, but in the case of one Canadian astronaut, it certainly didn't hurt. Tom Fenario explains how an Inuit bracelet made it into the final frontier.
I started sewing when I was young at home, like any other girls up north.
The holidays are a busy time of year for Victoria Ukpik. Her handcrafted Inuit-style mittens are in great demand. But recently, it's one of her other creations that's been grabbing the spotlight. A version of the sealskin bracelet is currently on the International Space Station.
I'm proud that this bracelet is somewhere in the space, and that Inuit should be proud of as well.
Engines have started and liftoff.
Earlier this month, Canadian astronaut David Saint-Jacques rode this rocket to the International Space Station. Before he was blasting off into space, Saint-Jacques was a doctor in Pervernatuk, an Inuit community of about 1,700 people in the subarctic Nunavik region of Quebec. He reached out to Ukpik on the recommendation of a mutual friend.
David wanted to bring something that was meaningful to Inuit. That was from, I think, because he was a doctor up north. So I think he feels that he has a connection.
Saint-Jacques will spend about 6.5 months in space conducting science experiments and operating robotics on the space station. He says he also wants to share his experiences with the world as much as possible.
It was nighttime, and then there was our first sunrise on orbit, and that was quite an emotional moment as I looked out the window and this little blue crescent starting to get brighter and brighter, and I realized, wow, this is actually the curve of the Earth. So that first sight, that first sunrise on orbit, I will never forget.
These days, Ukpik is a little too busy to keep track of Saint-Jacques' exploits in space. But she does think about it at night when she takes a break from her Montreal studio to look up at the sky.
It's kind of a nice thing to know that this thing is in the space somewhere.
See you soon, everybody. Bye-bye.
Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
That concludes the event.
If you notice a green glow in the sky tonight, rest assured it's not Santa's sleigh just yet. The Christmas comet has come to town.
If you look up and use binoculars, you might be able to see this greenish ball in the sky. If you are in light-polluted environments like the city of Edmonton, you need to really shield yourself away from a lot of the bright lights, and also use binoculars or a telescope to help you see it.
Comet 486P is the brightest comet to pass Earth this year and the 10th closest ever. The best view was last night when it came within 11.6 million kilometers of Earth. It's expected to slowly fade out in the coming weeks. Well, that's your news for you this Monday. Check out our website, aptnnews.ca, for more Indigenous news. I'm your host, Melissa Ridgen, and I'll see you back here tomorrow with Dennis Ward. Have a great night.